Today I'm going to show you exactly how to knit my most recent design, my Catalina Striped Pullover. I just love the construction of this sweater. It is knit from the top down, and you start by casting on stitches for the collar, join in the round, and then you'll knit a double knit collar. There is short row shaping for the neckline to allow the neckline to drop down a little bit in the front, and then you're going to make strategic increases for the shoulder. Get a little close-up of the shoulder here. You'll make steep increases for the shoulder in both the front and the back, and then you'll change where you make those increases to account for the sleeves. And then there are underarm increases to help the body get to the circumference that you need to for your size. And then you'll continue the striping throughout, and then you've got a 1x1 rib cuff. I do have sleeve decreases, and then there's 1x1 rib at the bottom here. Again, this construction is really, really great. I love this. It creates a more fitted shoulder. It's not quite as oversized, and I just love it. So I hope you enjoy it too. Please grab your copy of the pattern PDF. I've got links in the video description so you can download this pattern either on Etsy or Ravelry. I've got all the pattern details listed below. You can choose from 9 different sizes, from extra small all the way to 5X. I knit a size medium. Just so you know, I'm about a 36.5, 37 inch bust, and I chose to knit a size medium. I've got plenty of room. I like my sweaters to be a little more comfortable. All right, let's get started. I have knit my 1x1 rib collar to the length I'm supposed to, and now I'm going to fold over the collar and seam it as I knit, while also changing the needle size to a larger needle and strategically placing stitch markers for our increases. So make sure you have your beginning of round marker denoted in a different color or different kind of marker. I'm using a yellow stitch marker. I have 3 other stitch markers that I will need to strategically place around the sweater to denote where I will be making increases. We're not going to be making increases this round. We're just setting up for increases. So I am going to switch my needle size as well. So I will be knitting off of my smaller needle onto my bigger needle while also folding over the collar. And we fold over the collar. I'm going to push my needle through because we're moving off of these needles onto this needle. So I'm just going to insert my needle into the corresponding stitch below. The first one looks a little different because that's where I had my slip knot, and you just knit the 2 stitches together. So I've got my first one complete, and I'll show you in a little bit more detail so you can see exactly how I'm going through. But I'm inserting my left hand needle through the cast on edge here through both bars, and I'm just knitting I'm working 2 stitches together. This is a purl stitch, but it doesn't matter. We're just going to knit every stitch to connect it. So that's the second stitch. And just make sure you're inserting into the very next stitch, because if you get off, then your work, it's hard to connect it at the end. So you just want to make sure you're following and working into the next corresponding stitch. And it can get a little tight, so it can be easy to skip over a stitch. So just make sure you try to line it up as best you can. If you're off a tad, it's not the end of the world. Towards the end, you can just kind of make up for it. But if you're off by a lot, that's not ideal, because then the collar will look a little funny. So you just work this all the way around, placing the stitch markers when it's time to place a stitch marker. So your pattern will tell you to work a certain number of stitches, place a stitch marker, work another number of stitches, place a stitch marker. So I'll see you back here when I'm towards the end and I have my stitch markers placed. It's time for me to place my first stitch marker. Just want to show you how I do it. I just slide it on, And again, I'm continuing to work off the smaller needle onto the larger needle. I'm just pulling this through. That's the old needle as I go. And I'm just continuing to work to go through the cast on edge and knitting two together onto my new needle all the way around. Okay, I have finished folding over the collar, switching to larger needles, and placing the stitch markers. I've completed the last stitch, so I dropped my old needles and I have all of my stitches onto my larger needles. Now we will be working increases and short rows. So the short row shaping allows the front of the neck to come down so it is more curved and circular to allow for a more natural neckline. And what we're going to do is work these, just so you know, these two sections marked by these, the inside of these sections are what is going to be the top of the shoulder. So all of the increases will be, when we are working the shoulder, all of the increases will be on the outsides of these stitch markers on both the right side and the wrong side of the work. We are making steep increases to allow for the shoulder shaping. So we are going to work an increase here, work a few stitches, turn the work on the wrong side, purl back while also making an increase on this side, and then we will purl all the way around, making increases on the wrong side on either side, wrap and turn for a short row, and continue back while making increases. So I'll show you exactly how this is done. It can be a little confusing. Don't be intimidated. We're going to take it one step at a time. Just for reference, this is the neckline portion. And so to create this curved neckline, you won't continue knitting across these stitches. We need to make this section longer. So we're going to omit these neckline stitches. So I'll show you what I mean. So we're going to work across the first set of stitches. We're just knitting every stitch now. Knitting to the first stitch marker. Slip the marker. Make one left on the right side, insert the needle from front to back, and knit through the back, work 2 stitches, and then wrap and turn. So we're going to pull the yarn in front, slip the stitch over. We're just wrapping the stitch around the work, turning it, and now we are going to purl back to the marker. I've purled to the stitch marker. We're now going to make one right on the wrong side, and to do that you're going to insert the left hand needle from front to back under the yarn in between the 2 stitches and purl through the back. So we're always making increases on the outsides of these stitch markers. So we always leave these stitches in between these stitch markers intact. We never increase inside. It will always be the same amount of stitches. So now we're just purling to the beginning of round marker. So we just completed our first row, our first short row here. So I've purled to the beginning of round marker. And just to explain, all we've done is work this side of the work and back. Now we have to work all the way around because this is the neckline. So the beginning of round marker is in between the right shoulder and the back. This is the front neckline. So when we hold the work like this, so now we're going to be purling and working a short row over here and turning the work and coming back. So we are working over here and over here, and we're going to gradually start working our way in farther into the neckline. Now to begin the second round, we're on the outside of this shoulder stitch marker here. So we need to make one left on the wrong side. So we're going to insert our needle from back to front and purl through the front. Then we're going to purl all the way to the next stitch marker. So this is across the back. I've purled across to that first stitch marker and I purled across the back. Now we're going to make one right on the wrong side by inserting our needle between the stitch from front to back and purling through the back. Slip the stitch marker, purl across the next set of stitches, and again these are those shoulder stitches that always remain the same stitch count. Once you've worked the next stitch marker, you slip the stitch marker. Now we're going to do a make one left on the wrong side. Insert the needle from back to front and purl through the front. Now we've worked that increase stitch, we're going to work 2 stitches and then we're going to complete a wrap and turn around this stitch. Bring the yarn to the back and start knitting again, knitting to the stitch marker. We need to increase again now. Insert the needle from back to front. Knit through the front for make one right on the right side of the work. Knit the stitches in between these 2 stitch markers for the shoulder. Slip the stitch marker. Make one left on the right side. Insert the needle from front to back and knit through the back. And now you're going to knit across the back to that beginning of round marker. I've knit across the back to the beginning of round marker. We're going to end this round with a make one right, inserting the needle from back to front and knit through the front. So now we've completed 2 rounds, one where we've worked here and back, one where we've worked all the way around a little past the shoulder and back, right? So we're going to now continue knitting a couple of stitches past our previous wrap and turn, come back, work around here, work a few stitches past our previous wrap and turn over here, turn the work and purl back. So one round is a forward and back. The next round is forward and back over here. So that is our first round 1 and 2 of our wrap and turn. Now I'm going to show you how to work round 3 and 4, just working past the previous wrap and turn, making sure you're knitting into the wrap and turn to help make that wrap and turn less visible. So let's work around 3. We're going to knit to our marker, the first marker, slip the marker, make one left on the right side, insert the needle from front to back and knit through the back, picking up that bar in between the previous 2 stitches. Then you are going to work 2 stitches past the previous wrap and turn. You can see that wrap and turn right here. You can see where that stitch is wrapped around the stitch, but this stitch isn't worked. So when we get to the stitch, we're going to work into the wrap and turn. I'll show you that. So we're working all the way up to the wrap and turn stitch. Now that it's isolated, maybe you can see it a little bit better here. Okay, and to work into that wrap and turn, we're going to go up into the stitch and treat it almost like a double stitch here. I'll show that to you again. We're going to lift this wrap, put it on our needle, go into this needle as well. So it's almost like working a double stitch here, and I'm going to knit those together. So that's one. Now we're going to work 2 past the previous wrap and turn. So that's the wrap and turn. So I'm going to knit 2 stitches, 1, 2, and work a wrap around this stitch. So I'm just wrapping, literally wrapping the stitch around. And now I'm just purling to the marker, to the first marker. I've purled back to that first stitch marker. We're gonna make one right on the wrong side, so the stitch will be leaning to the right. So we insert our needle from front to back and purl through the back. Insert your needle front to back and purl through the back. So I slip the stitch marker and then I purl to the beginning of round marker. So round 3 isn't as long as the round 4 because we're not working across as many stitches. So I'm gonna work that last stitch, slip the beginning of round marker, and now I'm on a round 4. So with round 4, we have to work our first increase, work across the back, purling across the back, make our increases on either side of the shoulder stitches on the outside, work until we work into our first wrap and turn stitch, work 2 stitches past the previous wrap and turn, work the wrap and turn the work, knitting back, making the increases on either side of the stitch marker. So let's do that now. So I'm going to start by making one left on the wrong side. Purl across the back to the next stitch marker. Once I hit that next stitch marker, I'm going to make one right on the wrong side of the work by inserting the needle from front to back and purling through the back. Slip the stitch marker, purl across the next set of stitches, which are the shoulder stitches, to the next stitch marker. Slip the stitch marker. We're going to make one left on the wrong side, insert the needle from back to front, purl through the front. Now we're going to work 2 stitches past the previous wrap and turn. I can see it right here, so we'll need to make sure we purl into that wrap and turn. I'm going to work up to it just to show you where it is and how it's looking. This is the stitch that was wrapped, so I'm going to pull the top part off and kind of just pull up that wrap so I can purl into it. So I'm basically like purling 2 together. So I've worked the wrap and turn, now I'm purling 2 stitches past that and working the wrap and turn around this stitch where I just bring the yarn around, slip that stitch back, move my working yarn to the back, and now I am working back to the beginning of round marker, making my increases on either side of the shoulders. So for the first one here, I'm going to make one right, insert the needle from back to front, and knit through the front. Work the shoulder stitches. Working the shoulder stitches, slipping the marker, working a left leaning increase now on the outside of the stitch marker, insert the needle from front to back, and knit through the back. Now we're going to knit across the back of the work to the beginning of round marker. Once you are back to the beginning of round marker, you need to make one right, insert the needle from back to front, and knit through the front. So now we have completed 4 rounds. And if you look at the front now, you can see how the work is starting to dip down a little bit. So now you're going to repeat the past 2 rounds we just did, rounds 3 and 4, for a number of times more that the pattern says, for a total of a certain number of wrap and turns on each side. And then I will also tell you what the stitch count should be for the fronts and the backs. And again, you are increasing 4 stitches every single round. So I've completed all of my short row shaping. So the neck, as you can see, the collar dips down here in the front. I am at the beginning of round marker, and I'm just going to work 2 rounds now of increases before we switch colors. So I am just going to slip the beginning of round marker, knit the first stitch, which I did, work across the right shoulder stitches. Once I get to the next stitch marker, I slip the stitch marker, make 1 left, insert the needle front to back, knit through the back. I'm going to knit across the front, making sure I pick up those wrapped stitches. Once I knit across the front stitches to the next stitch marker, I'm going to make 1 right, insert the needle back to front, and knit through the front, slip the stitch marker, work across the left shoulder stitches, slip the stitch marker, make 1 left, insert the needle front to back, knit through the back, knit across the back to the beginning of round marker. Once I get to the beginning of round marker, you're going to make 1 right, insert the needle from back to front, knit through the front, and you've just completed an increase round. You're going to do 1 more increase round, and then we're going to switch colors. I'm almost done with this round, and when I'm about 3 or 4 stitches before the end and it's time to switch a color for the next round, I'm going to join before I get to the end of the round because I have to make an increase right away. And if I'm making an increase while I am joining the work, it can be a little messy. So I'm going to stop about 3 stitches before the end. I'm going to just kind of like wrap the yarn around this here, so it's just kind of looped in here. And that way it's just caught a little early. And then I'm going to do my last, I'm going to make sure it's pulled. I'm going to do my last increase here at the end of the round. And I'm going to insert the needle back to front, knit through the front. All right, I'm going to slip the stitch marker now, and I'm going to start knitting with my new color, my contrasting color. And now you're going to work the round just as you have before, making the increases in the same places, but you're just knitting with your contrasting color now. When you're starting and you're nearing the end of the round here and you have to make an increase, and this is where it can be a little tricky, make sure you pull the tail of that contrasting color so that this is a little tight because you will be working the increase right here. Okay, and you can just pull that, slip the stitch marker, and keep working. Okay, I'm finishing up around here, and I just want to explain a few things. So now I am done making increases at the shoulder line, and this will be at different points for different sizes. So you might not have started with your contrasting color yet. You might be farther along with your contrasting color. This is just the point where I am on my size where I'm stopping. You will continue to maintain working the contrasting color every 4 rounds, followed by 8 rounds of the main color. Now it's time for me to start increasing for the sleeves inside of these stitch markers now for the shoulder. The top of the shoulder will expand now to become the sleeve, and we will stop making increases on the outside of the stitch marker for the shoulders. We've worked the shoulders to the length that we're going to work for this size. We will work straight, then we will increase again at the underarm. The only increases we'll be making now are for the arms, and we will be making these increases every other round. We just worked increases before on every round. Now this is every other round. So I'm going to show you how to do the increases inside these stitch markers for the sleeves, and then you're going to do an increase here, increase here, increase here and here, knit to the end of the round, and then you'll knit an entire round and then work the increases. So here's how to increase on the inside of the stitch markers. Starting the new round, you're going to make one left on the inside, insert the needle front to back, knit through the back, then you'll work across the sleeve stitches here, and then once you reach the next stitch marker, you're going to make one right. Insert the needle from back to front and knit through the front. You'll slip the stitch marker, knit to the next stitch marker, and do the same kind of increases on the inside. Make one left, followed by make one right, and knit to the end of the round. So you're going to keep repeating an increase round followed by a knit round, and again the increases are only on the insides for the sleeves. Also alternating every 4 rounds for the contrasting color, 8 rounds for the main color. And I'll show you as I work how I carry the stitches, but I carry the stitches every 4 rounds. And so you're going to continue that till a certain point, and then we'll start increasing for the underarm. And I'm about to switch to a longer needle size very soon. I've got, the stitches are getting kind of scrunched, so you'll just switch to a longer needle when you need to. You can do that by knitting off of the shorter needle onto the longer needle, or however you like to switch needles. I just wanted to show you when it comes time to join a next skein of yarn, I like to hold my yarn double, and I'm doing this towards the end of the round. So it's kind of off to the side. It's not under the collar. It's not on the front of the sweater. It's on the back of the sweater. And I just hold the yarn double. So I'm taking my new skein, joining it with my old one, and I'm just going to knit 3 or 4 stitches double, kind of in an inconspicuous place. And then I'm going to drop the old tail and start knitting with my new skein of yarn. And then you just treat those double stitches as if they were one when you come back around. So that's how I join. I've completed 4 rows on my main color, and I just wanted to show you how I'm going to carry this. I'm going to carry my contrasting color halfway through this round by just wrapping the yarn so that now my contrasting color is caught, if you will, in the work, so it will get carried as I continue to work. So that's what it looks like. It's just wrapped around, and now I can continue working, and that yarn will be carried with the work. I've got a lot of stitches on my needles now, so I am just going to switch needles by knitting off of the shorter needles onto the longer needles. And it doesn't really matter where you start. You can start at the beginning of the round, but this is how I switch to longer needles when I'm not using interchangeable needles. I'm nearing the end of finishing this round where I'm switching to longer needles. Just wanted to show you how that looks. So I'm dropping my shorter needles. I'm on my longer needles. I did this right at the end of the round, so I need to make sure I have my beginning of round marker. And now I have more room on my longer needles. I'm getting ready to finish my 8th round on my main color here, and I'm going to switch again, and I'm going to carry the yarn up at this point. I'm a few stitches before the end, and then it's up here once I start a new round, and it won't pull once I start a new round at this point. So I'm just going to now lift and bring up this color. I like to kind of carry it a few stitches before I start the beginning of the round, and that can just help create a smoother transition. So now I'm going to continue. So you're going to continue alternating and increasing for the sleeves until you reach a certain stitch count for the sleeves, and after you've completed a certain number of increases for the sleeve, at which point it will be time to increase for the underarms. So now I'm at the point where I've reached the number of stitches and made the number of sleeve increases I'm supposed to before I start working the underarm increases. So we're looking at the back here, and you can see we've made our shoulder increases, and then we've worked the back straight while we've made the sleeve increases. Now it's time to work underarm increases to make the body wider so it can connect at the underarms. So we're going to be making increases on either side of the stitch marker. They're just spaced a little differently. So inside the sleeves, they're going to be right on the other side of the stitch marker. For the back, we're going to work 2 stitches and then work our increase, so the increases aren't right on top of each other. So I'll show you how to work an increase round with the underarm increases. So we're doing sleeve increases and underarm increases, and I've just completed a knit round where I've made no increases, and you might be at a different point in the stitch pattern. This is just where I am maintaining the 8 rounds of the main color, followed by the 4 rounds of our contrasting color. So I'm going to make an increase, make 1 left. This is at the sleeve. So now I'm going to knit across the right sleeve. Once I reach the stitch marker on the other side of the sleeve, I'm going to make 1 right. I'm going to slip the stitch marker, and now I'm on the front of the work. I'm going to knit 2 stitches and then make 1 left. So our increases on the fronts and the backs will always have 2 stitches in between the increases. So now I'm going to knit across the front. Once I have 2 stitches left working across the front, I'm going to make 1 right, insert the needle from back to front. Knit through the front. I'm going to knit those 2 stitches, reaching the next stitch marker. So now I'm beginning to work across the left sleeve, and when I'm on the sleeves, I make the increases right on the other side of the stitch marker. I'm making 1 left, insert the needle front to back, and then knit through the back. Then I'm going to work all the way across the sleeve. Once I've worked across the left sleeve to the next stitch marker, I'm going to make 1 right, slip the stitch marker. Now I'm at the back, so I need to work 2 stitches and then make my left leaning increase, insert the needle front to back, knit through the back, then knit across the back until I have 2 stitches before the beginning of round marker. Once you've worked across the back and you have 2 stitches left, you're going to make your last increase, making 1 right, insert the needle from back to front, and knit through the front, and then you'll knit to the beginning of round marker. So now you're going to continue with a knit round followed by an increase round, increasing for the underarm and the sleeves. And then you'll continue those increase rounds followed by knit rounds until it's time to divide for the body, and you'll have a specific stitch count for each sleeve and for the front and the back. So I'll see you back here when it's time to divide for the body. Okay, I've completed the underarm increases and the sleeve increases to the point that I'm supposed to for my size. Now it's time to divide for the body. And when we divide for the body, we remove the sleeve stitches on both sides, put those stitches on a holder. I'm going to use my knitting extension cords here. You can use a piece of waste yarn, and then we just separate out those sleeve stitches so we can knit in the round just for the body. I'm going to remove the stitch marker. I'm going to place the right sleeve stitches on a knitting extension cord. It's really easy to just slide these on, especially with this needle and yarn. I'm going to slide the stitches on to the point where I hit the sleeve, the next stitch marker, which marks the end of the sleeve. I'm going to pull this through, make sure my sleeve stitches are in front of me. You can tie a knot. Sometimes I tie a knot so the stitches don't fall off. And then you're going to knit your underarm, work your underarm cast on stitches. In my case, I'm working 6. I'm going to make sure I place my beginning of round marker on the needle halfway between my underarm cast on stitches. I'm going to cast on the rest. And then I'm going to continue knitting across the front. So I will knit all the way across the front stitches to the next sleeve, which is the left sleeve. When I hit the next sleeve, after I've knit across the front, again, I'm going to remove the stitch marker, place my stitches onto this knitting extension cord here, getting all of the left sleeve stitches on here, all the way up until I hit the next stitch marker that marks the end of the sleeve. And then I can make sure these sleeve stitches are resting in front of my work. I'm going to knot this. I'm going to bring my work together now, making sure my sleeve is in front here. And I'm going to cast on my underarm stitches using the backwards loop method. And you'll cast on the number of stitches you need to for your size. And then you'll just join the back and knit all the way across the back to the beginning of round marker, which is over here at the other underarm. So you'll continue now just working in the round, maintaining the stripe pattern, and then you'll just switch the colors at the beginning of round over here. So you'll just work the body now until the length you're supposed to for your size, or the length that you would like to work, before you work the body ribbing. So I'll see you back here when it's time to work the body ribbing, but just wanted to show you now what it looks like. We've got our sleeve stitches off of our needles and we're just knitting in the round for the body. Also just wanted to show you too, when you come back around, I'm completing my first round here, what it looks like to work those backwards loop cast on stitches. I know it can be hard to see. You're just going to make sure you knit them as you would a regular stitch, but just work carefully, slide them off. They might seem a little loose at first, but they will tighten up as you continue to work, and you might have a lot of yarn. It looks like it's loose, but you'll just keep working across those backward loop cast on stitches, knitting into them so that they stay twisted on your needle. And everything might, again, seem a little loose, but it will tighten up as you continue to work. And then you can seam up any underarm gaps at the end. But that's what it looks like to work those underarm cast-on stitches. When you've worked the body to the length you're supposed to for your size, measuring from the underarm, just measure using a tape measure from the underarm down to the body, measuring like this. And if you are adjusting the body length, then make sure you recognize that you'll be adding about 1.5 inches for the body ribbing. So continue, and then just make sure you account for the 1.5 inches that the body ribbing will add. And you're going to switch to the smaller needle size when it's time for the ribbing. So I'm going to start knitting the 1x1 rib, knit 1, purl 1, all the way around. switching from my larger needles to my smaller needles. I'm going to pull this through here. And I'm going to work this all the way around. And then I'm going to work 1 by 1 rib for the length I'm supposed to for the body ribbing. And then I will show you how to bind off. I'm almost finished with my first ribbing round, knitting off of my larger needles onto my smaller needles. I lost my beginning of round marker, so I'm going to remove the bigger needles, and I'm going to get my stitch marker back on here, and I'm going to continue knitting 1 by 1 rib in the round. Slip the stitch marker and you just continue. Knit 1, purl 1, and then I will show you how I'm going to bind off. Okay, I have completed my ribbing on the body to the length the pattern calls for, the length that I would like. And now I'm going to show you how I'm going to work the tubular bind off. You can bind off in many different ways. I like binding off in the tubular bind off for works that I'm using either worsted weight or thinner yarn. I just think it gives a great stretch to the work, especially if you are pulling something over your head. And I'm just going to show you how to work that. So I'm going to finish the last stitch here, and then I'm going to take the beginning of round marker off. And I'm going to place a stitch marker, a removable stitch marker, on the first 2 stitches of the work here, just to mark that. And I'm going to be coming back around and working those stitches again at the end. So I'm going to get that on. Now I'm going to cut the yarn about 2.5 times the length of what I'm binding off. So when you're binding off, it's kind of long. It's kind of a long piece that we have to work with. So I'm gonna just measure about 2.5 to 3 times the length of the work and cut a very long tail. And this is where a lot of people get stuck, because the tail can seem so long to work with and it can get caught. So I'm just kind of measuring loosely here, about 2.5 to 3 times the length of the body here, and I'm going to snip that, and I'm going to weave this through a tapestry needle, and I'm going to weave it through pretty far because you don't want to work with a ton of yarn at once. So when you pull it through, it becomes a little shorter. Okay, so we are going to work 1 by 1 rib in a tubular bind off here. And the first stitch is a knit stitch. So I'm going to, and we're going to work this in 2 steps. A lot of people, I think, complicate it more because they work in like 4 steps. I'm going to show you how to do this in 2 steps on a knit stitch and a purl stitch to make this a little bit easier. So you're going to slip the first stitch off knitwise because the first stitch is a knit stitch. I'm going to skip the next stitch and then go through the next stitch, which is also a knit stitch, purlwise in the front. Show you that again. So I slipped off the first stitch knitwise, I skipped the next stitch, and I'm going to go into that next stitch, which is another knit stitch, purlwise in the front. That is the first step. And the key now is to pull this yarn through, making sure it's always on the side and not getting caught on all of the needles and the stitch markers and all that. So that is the first step. The second step now is to work this through a purl stitch. And when you work this through a purl stitch, and make sure you pull this kind of tight after you're done, you're going to slip the first stitch purlwise off of the left hand needle and leave it. okay? We're going to skip the next stitch. We are going to come through from behind and then kind of work our needle around to go through that next stitch knitwise and pull that through, making sure you're keeping this yarn kind of off to the side. Gently pull that through. And I'm getting caught on the stitch marker, which again, you have to be careful. And again, you're going to want to pull this pretty tight. Okay, now that I'm off the stitch marker, I'm going to show you this again. So my first stitch now is a knit stitch. Slip the stitch off knitwise, skip this next stitch, insert my needle purlwise through that next stitch. Pull that through. Making sure your yarn is off to the side and doesn't get caught. Next stitch now is a purl stitch. Slip the stitch off purlwise, skip that next stitch, come in through. I'm gonna make sure you can see. Skip the next stitch, come in through the next two stitches, reach around and go in knitwise through that stitch. So now you can see this start to come through. So you're just going to simply repeat how you're working the knit stitch and the purl stitch all the way around. Okay, I have 2 stitches left to bind off here in my tubular bind off. So I just wanted to show you what to do at the end. So you'll work, so this is a knit stitch. So I'm going to slide that off knitwise. And now I'm going to go through purlwise through that first stitch that's sitting still on my removable stitch marker. So I've got that through. Now, this is a purl stitch, so I'm going to slip my last stitch off purlwise, drop my needle here, and then come between these 2 stitches, and instead of doing it in one fell swoop, I'm going to come back and go through that one that way. And now I have finished binding off using the tubular bind off. I'm going to weave in my end here by going up one leg of the stitch all the way up the side here. And then I'm going to cut my tail, and we've completed the body and the tubular bind off for the body. Now we are going to knit the sleeves. So I'm going to show you how to knit the sleeves. So you're going to take your larger 16-inch circular needles. I am going to unknot the stitches I have sitting on my knitting extension cord. And now I'm going to place these stitches back onto a needle. Connect the end here and slide these stitches back onto this circular knitting needle. I'm gonna remove my knitting extension cord once I get those stitches on. And I'm going to maintain the striping pattern. So I was in the middle of working my contrasting color, so I'm going to start with my contrasting color. We are going to start at the right side of the underarm. So that means we're going to start over here, and this is the case for both sleeves. So you're going to take your yarn and make sure you have a stitch marker handy, because we're going to note the beginning of the round halfway through the underarm cast on stitches. So I am going to start picking up the stitches here. I'm going to go through this little loop here in the top, and I am going to wrap my yarn around the needle and pull this through. So that's one. I'm going to hold the tail as I pick up the other stitches. There's kind of like a little notch with the backwards loop cast on that I'm trying to go through. And that's 2, 3. And then I'm going to place the stitch marker once I get this on. So if I have 6 underarm cast on stitches, I'm going to place my beginning of round marker after 3 stitches, and I'm going to continue to pick up these stitches. And once you have all of the underarm cast on stitches cast on, you can simply just start knitting, and you will have a little bit of a gap, and I always just seam up that gap at the underarm once I am weaving in my tail at the end. There are many different techniques some people use to close up the gap at the underarm. I just always like to weave in mine at the end. So you're going to work all the way around, and I have 2 more rounds in this contrasting color. And as you work your way around, you can hold the tail to help keep those stitches tight, and again, you'll have a little gap, but you can just keep knitting. Now I'm on the underarm cast on stitches, and I'm going to slip the stitch marker, and I have 1 more round to knit before I need to switch to my main color. So just continue, and the pattern will tell you to work in the established stripe pattern for a certain length from the underarm, so that's where we've picked up stitches, before you work a decrease round. We have gradual decreases on the sweater. Show you what the sleeve looks like. I've already done one of the sleeves. I'll show you what the other sleeve looks like. I've already done one of the sleeves. So we have some gradual decreases to help the sleeve get smaller for the sleeve cuff. And you work the sleeve just like you did the body, joining the yarn. Like so I have to rejoin my main color now. And again, you're gonna have a gap. And I'm just gonna make sure I'm pulling the tail, holding the tail. It's time for me to join my main color, and I just wanted to refresh your memory again. I'm gonna join right at the end of the round, probably right here, and just weave the contrasting color through. So so when I join to start the new round, it's not joined right there, so it just gives it a little bit of a, I'm just gonna go like this. I twisted it around so it's joined there. I'm finishing the round, gonna slip the marker now, and then start knitting with my main color, making sure I don't use the tail. And I'm gonna keep going until it's time for me to work a decrease round. So just to reference the pattern, where it says how long from the underarm to work before you work a decrease round. When it's time to work a decrease round, I'm going to slip my stitch marker. I'm going to start the round. So I've worked to a certain length from the underarm, and then I'm going to knit 1. Then I'm going to knit 2 stitches together to reduce to 1 stitch. Then I'm going to knit all the way around until I have 3 stitches left. And when you have 3 stitches left before the beginning of round marker, you're going to slip, slip, knit, which is slip a stitch knitwise, slip a stitch knitwise, and then knit 2 together, and then knit 1. So now you've decreased 2 stitches on either side of the stitch marker. Now you're going to continue working in pattern, decreasing a certain number of stitches every certain distance, as you can see how I did on this other sleeve. And then I will show you how to knit the cuff. Okay, I've completed my sleeve to the length I'm supposed to, for my size, the length that I would like, understanding that the cuff will add a little bit more length. You can try the sweater on to make sure it fits, and you can just continue in the main color to the length that you would like minus the cuff after you finish this last stripe. And the goal is to make sure you don't have the stripe right up next to the base of the ribbing here. Make sure you give yourself ample space before you start the sleeve ribbing. That's just kind of how it's designed. And I'm gonna actually knit using double pointed needles for the sleeve ribbing. I know a lot of people don't like to use double pointed needles, but I'm gonna show you how I do it because the cuff is pretty small on the smaller sizes. And I just wanted to note on some of the larger sizes, the sleeve circumference is larger and you might want the cuff smaller. So feel free to knit around a decrease round, adding knit 2 togethers evenly spaced all around the sleeve cuff for the number of stitches you would like to decrease. That's a way that you can add additional decreases. I'm going to show you how to knit the sleeve cuff using double pointed needles because a lot of people don't like using them, but I don't mind using them for the cuff. I'm going to actually knit 1 more round, but just knitting just to get my stitches on the double pointed needles. I am starting to transfer the stitches like 2 stitches before the end of the round because I don't like to have my beginning of round at the end of a needle. So I'm going to evenly space without overthinking how many stitches I have on 3 needles. So I am going to knit about 1/3 of the stitches onto one of the needles, and then once I get about 1/3 of the stitches on my first needle here, I'm gonna knit a few more. Then I'm going to take my next needle. You're going to be placing the stitches on 3 needles and using the 4th to actually knit. So I'm going to start on the next needle now. And I usually just kind of turn my work once the sleeve kind of gets twisted. All right, get a few more stitches on here. And now I'm going to put the remaining stitches on my 3rd needle. And this just allows the stitches to be broken up so that you can knit them in the round a little more comfortably. So just knit across the remaining stitches. All right, now I have all of my stitches onto my double pointed needles. I'm going to take my 4th needle now. Finish the end of the round, so I need to just knit these 2 stitches until I get to the beginning of round marker. Now I'm going to start the 1 by 1 rib by simply just knitting 1, purling 1. And you'll just knit in the round using these double pointed needles. And again, I tend to turn my sleeve when it starts to get twisted, and I'll just show you how to keep knitting. Just noting that I went down a size in my needles, and once you knit to the end, I'm just continuing the 1 by 1 rib, and then when you get to the end of the first needle, that becomes the one you work on the next needle with. So you'll just continue knitting in the round 1 by 1 rib, knitting off of one needle, taking that, using that to work the stitches off the next needle all the way around. So now I'll just start working, continuing my 1 by 1 rib. I ended with a knit stitch, so just need to pay attention. I'm going to start with a purl stitch here. I'm going to tighten this first stitch up to try to avoid gaps. All right, so I will see you back here when I am done with the ribbing, just to show you what it looks like. All right, I have finished my cuff to the length I'm supposed to, and I'm going to work the tubular bind off the same way I did for the body. So the video has chapters marked, so you can go back to that section. I'm just going to show you how to kind of tee it up here because we're using DPNs. So I'm almost at the end of the round, and remember that I don't like to start my beginning and end of round at the end of a needle. So I'm actually going to work to the beginning of the round, but move these stitches over to my right hand needle instead of on a new needle. And I'm just going to leave that, and I'm going to remove my beginning of round marker, and then I'm going to clip my tail here for my sleeve and start working the tubular bind off just as I did for the body, but instead I will be working off of the double pointed needles here. Just finishing my last sleeve, weaving in the ends. I'm going to snip the tail here. And I'm done with the sweater, and all that's left is weaving in ends. So I'm going to show you how I'm going to seam up the underarms if you have any underarm gaps. And basically all I do is take the tail, and I'm going to weave in my end where I have the gap, and making sure you use the color, correct color. I have a gap here a little bit. Let's see if you can see it here. I've got a bit of a gap, the underarm here around where I joined. So I'm gonna just take my yarn and kind of weave around the outside stitches just to kind of seam things up and tighten everything up a little bit. And then I'll just weave everything through and cut that tail, and just kind of do the same thing for the other underarm, and then your sweater is complete. I really hope you guys enjoyed knitting your Catalina sweater with me, and I will see you in the next tutorial.